Pull up a map of Switzerland. Now overlay language. French on the west, German on the east. The line between them doesn't follow mountains or rivers. It cuts straight through farmland. To understand Switzerland, you have to understand one simple fact. The Alps are a wall. A 750-mile barrier running east to west, separating northern Europe from the Mediterranean. For centuries, if you wanted to move goods or armies between Italy and Germany, you had exactly two realistic options. The first was the Great St. Bernard Pass. At 2,469 meters, it's been in use since the Bronze Age, over 3,000 years. The Romans recognized this immediately. Around 43 AD, under Emperor Claudius, they completed a proper road over the pass, paving a route that would connect the Rhine Valley to the Po Valley. At the summit, they built a temple to Jupiter Poeninus, the god of the high peaks. The name stuck. The entire mountain range on that side became known as the Pennine Alps, and the valley leading north from the pass became one of the most valuable corridors in Europe, Valais. But here's where it gets interesting. The Great St. Bernard fed traffic into one specific route, west along the Rhone Valley toward Lake Geneva, then north into what is now France. This wasn't the only path through Switzerland. It was the western path, and the people who controlled it, who settled along it, who profited from it for centuries, they weren't Germanic. They were connected to the Roman world. When the Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, two different peoples flooded into what is now Switzerland. From the east came the Alemanni, a confederation of Germanic tribes who swept across the Rhine and settled the Swiss plateau. They brought their language, they brought their customs, and unlike some invaders, they didn't adopt the culture they conquered, they replaced it. From the west came the Burgundians. They took control of the Rhone Valley, Valais, and the area around Lake Geneva, the lands along that Roman road. But here is the crucial difference. The Burgundians assimilated. They adopted the language of the local Gallo-Roman population. Within a few generations, they were speaking a Romance language that would eventually become French. So by around 600 AD, a linguistic border had already formed. Germanic speakers to the east, Romance speakers to the west. And that border ran almost exactly where the modern language line sits today. You would think this would gradually fade. It did not. It hardened. The reason is infrastructure. When the medieval warm period began around 900 AD, Europe's population boomed. Trade routes that had decayed after Rome suddenly became valuable again. And the biggest prize was the Gotthard Pass. The Gotthard sits at 2,106 meters in central Switzerland. For centuries, it was nearly impassable, not because of its height, but because of the Schollenen Gorge, a terrifying ravine where the Ross River carved through vertical cliffs. Around 1220, someone, possibly Walser settlers from Valais, built a wooden bridge across it, the famous Teufelsbrücke, the Devil's Bridge. That bridge changed everything. Suddenly, there was a direct route from Zurich and the Rhine to Milan and the Mediterranean. No detour west, no dependence on the Great St. Bernard. The Gotthard became the new spine of north-south European trade, and the communities that controlled it, Uri, Schwyz, Unterwalden, became powerful enough to resist the Habsburgs. In 1291, they signed a pact of mutual defense. That pact became the nucleus of Switzerland. The Swiss Confederacy didn't form because of shared language or culture. It formed because of a mountain pass, and that pass was in the German-speaking zone. Now here's the twist you might not expect. The language border didn't freeze because the East and West stopped interacting. It froze because they interacted in a very specific way. In the 12th century, a powerful German dynasty, the House of Zähringen, was granted authority over parts of Upper Burgundy by the Holy Roman Emperor. They were German-speaking nobles ruling over French-speaking territory. And they did what medieval rulers do. They built cities. In 1157, they founded Fribourg. In 1191, they founded Bern. Both cities sat directly on the linguistic frontier. Bern's original castle, Niedeg, was built, according to medieval chroniclers, on the border between German-speaking Alemannians and French-speaking Burgundians. This wasn't an accident. The Zeringens were creating strategic outposts, German-speaking settlements planted at the edge of French-speaking territory. And when the dynasty died out in 1218, those cities became independent. Bern, especially, began expanding, absorbing French-speaking lands to the west while remaining firmly German in character. The linguistic border didn't just survive, it became a political line. And political lines, once drawn, are almost impossible to erase. The proof is in what happened to Valais. Remember, Valais was the western corridor, the route along the Roman road from the Great St. Bernard. For centuries, it was solidly French-speaking. But during the medieval warm period, German-speaking Walser settlers migrated from the Bernese Oberland into the upper reaches of the Rhone Valley. They pushed up into the high meadows that warmer temperatures had made habitable. By 1300, Upper Valais was German. Lower Valais remained French. The border between them runs almost exactly where the medieval Walser settlement ended. Today, the canton of Valais is officially bilingual. The town of Sierre is French-speaking. The town of Luc, just 15 kilometers east, is German. And the line between them hasn't moved in 700 years. This pattern repeated across Switzerland. Wherever German settlement pushed westward, it stopped at natural barriers or at lines established by the Zeringens centuries earlier. Wherever French-speaking culture held, it held along routes that traced back to Roman roads. The infrastructure created the settlements created the language, and the language created the politics, which brings us back to 1992. The Swiss call their language divide the Rostigraben, the Rosti Ditch, named after a potato dish popular in German-speaking Switzerland. The term was coined during World War I, when Swiss public opinion split along linguistic lines. German-speaking Swiss sympathized with Germany. French-speaking Swiss favored France. The country's neutrality held, but the internal division was impossible to ignore. That division resurfaced in December 1992. The European Economic Area vote wasn't just about economics, it was about identity. French-speaking Switzerland, historically connected to France through the old Western trade routes, saw Europe as a natural partner. German-speaking Switzerland, historically self-reliant thanks to the Gotthard, saw Europe as a threat to independence. The results were almost perfectly predictable. Geneva voted 78% yes. Zurich voted 61% no. The only German-speaking cantons to vote yes were Basel-Stadt and Basel-Landschaft, both of which sit on the Rhine, facing France and Germany, not inward toward the Alps. The final tally, 50.3% no. The margin, roughly 23,000 votes out of 4.7 million cast. Turnout was 78.7%, the highest since women gained the right to vote in 1971. One Roman road, one medieval power shift, one referendum decided by a fraction of a percent. The line held. And it's still holding. In 2014, Switzerland voted to restrict immigration from the European Union. Once again, French-speaking regions opposed the measure more strongly than German-speaking ones. Ticino, the Italian-speaking canton south of the Gotthard, historically isolated from both power centers, swung the vote toward restriction. In political science, they call this path dependence, the idea that early choices constrain all future options. In Switzerland, The early choice was made by Roman engineers who decided where to build a road. The road determined which valleys grew rich. The rich valleys attracted settlers. The settlers brought language. The language shaped identity. And the identity, 1,500 years later, still shapes elections. Switzerland likes to present itself as a miracle of multilingual harmony, and in some ways, it is. 4 national languages, 26 cantons, direct democracy, no civil war since 1847. But harmony isn't the same as unity. The Rustigraben is real. French-speaking Swiss still watch more French television. German-speaking Swiss still vacation in Germany. In Parliament, simultaneous translation is standard because members often can't understand each other's regional dialects. The difference is, the Swiss accept this. They've built a political system that doesn't require agreement. Cantons have enormous autonomy. Referendums give every region a voice. The country isn't held together by shared language or culture. It's held together by shared infrastructure, the same passes, the same tunnels, the same highways that made Switzerland a crossroads in the first place. There's one more detail worth mentioning. In 2016, Switzerland opened the Gotthard Base Tunnel, the longest and deepest railway tunnel in the world. 57 kilometers through the Alps, a direct line from Zurich to Milan, finally bypassing the mountain pass that created the Swiss Confederacy 700 years earlier. The opening ceremony featured dancers dressed as goats, miners emerging from the earth, and a figure in a giant winged costume meant to represent the soul of the mountain. It was deliberately mystical, deliberately weird. Because for the Swiss, the Gotthard is not just a tunnel, it is a symbol of what holds the country together. The ceremony was broadcast in German, French, and Italian. Depending on which channel you watched, you got different commentary, different emphasis, different interpretations of what it all meant. Same event, same tunnel, different stories. That's Switzerland. One country split by a line no one can see, a line drawn by a road that's been there since Rome. The Via Francigena, the medieval pilgrimage route that crossed the Great St. Bernard, is still walked today. Hikers follow the same path Archbishop Sigeric documented in 990 AD. They pass through French-speaking villages, then German-speaking villages, then French again, depending on which side of the valley floor they're on. If you ask them where the border is, most couldn't tell you. There's no sign, no checkpoint, just a gradual shift in the language on street signs, a different style of church steeple, a different smell from the bakery. The border is invisible, but it's there. It's been there since the Romans. And unless something breaks Switzerland apart, it will still be there in another 1,500 years. This pattern isn't unique to Switzerland. In Belgium, a similar linguistic border between Dutch-speaking Flanders and French-speaking Wallonia traces back to the boundary of Frankish settlement after Rome fell. In Spain, Catalonia's distinct identity follows old Roman provincial lines. In Italy, the Veneto's separatist sentiment tracks with the boundary of the Venetian Republic. Across Europe, the borders that feel most alive today are often the oldest ones. Not the lines drawn at Versailles, not the lines negotiated in Brussels, the lines that emerged from roads, rivers, and who settled where when the empire collapsed. Switzerland just happens to be the clearest example. A country designed around passes, a democracy that gives every region a veto, a language border that predates the nation itself by 1,000 years and still decides elections. If Switzerland ever fragments, historians won't have to guess where the fault lines are. They were drawn in Roman concrete, and they haven't moved since. If you want to see more invisible lines, the roads, rivers, and borders that still shape how we vote, speak, and fight, subscribe. There are a lot more maps with secrets hiding in plain sight.